I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. You're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Sam. Good to be here.
Thanks for joining me. I know a little bit about your story already.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to sort of leave it up to you, and I'm sort of very interested to see where you will start it.
Mm-hmm.
Where does your story start?
Where does my story start? I actually struggle to know how to answer that sometimes because there's been so many little formative things along the journey that to me are really, really important, but they seem very small, and I don't want to unnecessarily make the story, go on for hours and hours and hours, as much as people would like to get that from one of your podcasts. But I guess, like where I was born, it's in a place called Altona, which is kind of suburban Melbourne now, but when I was born, it was outer western suburbs of Melbourne, and it was beachside. So the little tiny hospital that I was born in was 50 metres from the beach. And now it's a community centre. It's still there. But that very first year of my life was beachside, outside. Mum and Dad would take me out quite a lot. And I wonder, there's no way of ever really knowing this, but I wonder whether those first few months of my life, spending so much time outside by the beach, listening to the waves, kind of infused into my developing infant body, and those outdoor environments became the place that I found most peace, most contentment, most solitude. Very soon after that, we moved even further out into the western suburbs of Melbourne to a place called Hoppers Crossing. And at the time, it was literally known as the country suburbs. So Mum and Dad were one of the first families to buy and build a house there. When I say house, it was a tiny little 12-square house. And literally in every direction, there was just paddocks as far as you could see. So in one direction, you could see out to, we call it a mountain range, but really it was just a big hill called the Yuyangs in Western Melbourne. And in the other direction, you could see the city, or what was Melbourne City at that point in time, even though it was sort of 45 kilometres away, and the same to the north and to the south. And remember, despite these youthful looks, I was actually born at a time where there was no mobile phones or no internet or anything like that. So to, fill in your spare time, it was go outside and explore. And so that's what I did. I would explore the fields around where I lived, catch lizards and birds and all of that type of thing, and really felt this beautiful connection with nature. And I was always very content. I always felt very safe, never felt like I was in danger. And as I got older, of course, I'd get a bike and I could explore further afield. And, I'm a little bit staggered by this concept now, but the only rule that Mum and Dad gave me when I got my bike and I could ride and explore, the only rule that Mum and Dad gave me was I had to be back before the street lights were on. And so I'd disappear at sort of 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, and Mum and Dad would have no idea where I was for the whole day. And then I'd come back and, how was your day? Good. And that was it. But what I would do, sometimes with a friend, but often by myself, is I would go to the river or the mountains or the creeks or somewhere where it was just me exploring nature. And I can distinctly remember sitting in some places, by the river or even in some of the parks and gardens around where I lived, kind of talking to my shadow. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but I was aware of something bigger than myself in that place that I wanted to commune with. And so my shadow just became the focus for that. And like I said, it was very peaceful. I've got really good memories of that. And I think mum and dad could recognize that there was something in their little boy that was quite sensitive, was perhaps a little bit unusual. No comments from you at this point in time. But also I think they recognized there was something spiritual about it as well. And my parents are not highly educated people at all. They left in the equivalent of year 7 and year 8 to work in family businesses and get apprenticeships and things like that. And so they didn't really know what to do with this other than identify that the church is a place that has spiritual stuff. So we'll just send our kid to church. And that's what they did. Now, I describe my family of origin, my mum and dad and my sister. I describe them as a Christian family, but not a church family. So we rarely went to church or anything like that. But because of their generation, they had a connection with the Baptist church. They were married in a Baptist church, and there was a Baptist church in walking distance from our home. So they just sent me to the Sunday school of the Baptist church. And can I say, hand on heart, I hated every second of that. It was just boring as anything.
Fair.
It just was. And this whole environment and being in this building and hearing all the different things that are happening from people that, I like, they were friendly and everything, but I just didn't really feel like I fitted into this place at all. And I can remember one time mum and dad dropped me off from Sunday school. Like, they just dropped me off and they'd go home. They didn't stay for church or anything. So not fair. And they dropped me off for Sunday school one time and it wasn't on. I don't know if it was like school holidays or something. So I had to sit in big church by myself. And, they give me this book that had songs in it. And it's like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? Do I have to read it? Do I sing every single one? I'm not musical at all, so I didn't know what that meant. And anyway, the person that was sitting next to me would point to the numbers on the wall and you had to find that song in the book and then you had to sing it. And I tell you, this church service went for like 75 hours. It just went on and on and on and on and on. It's like, at this point in time, I hate my parents for sending me to this thing. And it's like, I just want to get on my bike and go down to the river. Anyway, it finished and, I still was involved a little bit with Sunday school and things like that. And while I didn't like the actual process of going, what I did like was hearing these stories about God and learning a language for describing at least parts of my experience down by the river or out in nature in a way that I hadn't had the words for before. So in that sense, there started to be this growing awareness of something bigger than myself that there was actually a language for. And somehow church, this really boring thing that I have to go to, is somehow intimately connected with that.
For those who have not listened, I have interviewed Matt one other time for another podcast. So it will not be the last time that you hear Matt ramble about being connected to nature. It took him a whole 2.5 seconds to bring it up.
That long? Oh my gosh, I'm slipping. I'm sorry.
Matt is also a forest therapist, so he will sit here for hours and ramble and rave about nature and connection to nature.
Very harsh describing it as a ramble and rave. I'm quite offended by that.
No, you're not.
So if you're listening to this and this podcast goes for anything less than hours and hours, you know that she has edited out lots of the really
yeah. So knowing a bit about where things go, how did we go from sitting in a boring church service to being the man up the front of the church service?
Well, there's a fair bit in between, as you can imagine. So I finished my primary schooling, and I still really don't know why. I should ask my parents this, but they decided to send me to a Christian secondary school. And this was basically a brand new school. So there was only 60 students from prep or foundation at that point in time through to year 8.
What is foundation?
It's kind of like the year between kindergarten and grade 1. So it's called prep here, but in some places it's called foundation.
Or in some states it doesn't exist.
Yeah. So you're usually about 5 or 6 years old when you go to this. So I finished my primary schooling, and then, 12 or 13, start year 7, secondary school. Mum and Dad sent me to this very new Christian school, and it was within walking distance from home, but it meant it was what it literally was 5 single portables in the middle of all those cow paddocks that I just described to you before. So to get to my classroom, I literally had to walk through fields with cow poo everywhere and sit in these portables, and that was my education. So I went to a Christian school, and Mum and Dad said to me, well, you're going to this school now, you're going to have some God stuff happen at this school. Do you still want to go to Sunday school? No way. I just pulled the plug on that straight away.
I'm out.
That's it. There was my out. So I was like, I'm not going back to Sunday school anymore. And while there was a little bit of me that kind of, like I said, liked some of the learning that was there, just the whole boring environment, I didn't want anything to do with that anymore. But of course, what continued to happen was I continued to hear the stories of God and the Bible, but now at a more age-appropriate level as I started to get older and, into adolescence, and some of that critical thinking starts to kick in. And the Christian school that I went to, it actually got in a bit of trouble in later years because they made a point of employing Christians rather than teachers. So there were some people that were my teachers that had questionable teaching qualifications, if teaching qualifications. So it did mean that I was exposed to quite a wide variety of teaching when it came to Christian thinking and theology. There were some super conservative people that wouldn't have a TV or anything like that in their home because it was introducing Satan into your world. You shouldn't listen to rock music or any of those sorts of things. I remember thinking, that's not very fun. Not really interested in that. Down to, the other end of the scale where there was a lot of social action and, things like that. So I opened my kind of eyes to just the breadth of what this thing called Christianity was. I still wasn't really involved in church or anything until about year 9 or year 10. And of course, what's the thing that gets everybody back to church at that point in time? I was chasing a girl.
Of course you were.
Yeah, that's it. So I started going out with this girl whose family was heavily involved in the Uniting Church. And so I started going along to that youth group, not because of anything really that was happening at the front, because I was interested in the girl. And Mum and Dad were okay with that, but was still sort of leaning towards the Baptist church. You should really go to the Baptist church. That's your church. It's like, what do you mean it's my church? What's the difference? Yeah. No idea about denominations or anything at this point in time. Anyway, that girl dumped me eventually. So I went back to the Baptist church because it was too awkward going to the Uniting Church youth group. And it was now at this stage of my life that I started taking some of these stories around God and spirituality a lot more seriously. And I wanted to be part of that community at a much deeper level. I really, really wanted to belong. But I wasn't from a church family. And I wasn't very sporty. I wasn't very musical. All those things that were generally admired, I didn't have any of those things. And so the only thing that I thought I could do that is going to help me fit into this space was learn about the Bible as much as I could, because I knew that I, without sounding arrogant, was a good thinker. I had my experience of spirituality, which by now I was starting to call God. And I thought that this would be my way to connect. So that's what I did. I learnt as much as I possibly could. I preached my first sermon when I was 16 years old. And my school principal came along to that day and he walked out in disgust.
Oh, dear.
I should have seen that as a bit of a, prophetic action for what was to come later in life.
Do you remember what it was about?
Look, not exactly. It was along the lines of, education is important, but it's not the be all and end all. It's important to be who you are and develop other parts of your world. And I must have said something that
way to piss off the principal.
That's like, and like in the church that I was part of, whoever was the guest speaker would stand at the door afterwards, and people would generally just be nice and polite, say, lovely sermon, and shake your hand. And if they hated it, he just walked out straight past me, didn't even acknowledge my presence.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that's weird. So that was my that was what I was trying to do, but that was my first experience of having like some sort of opposition or someone not liking something that I thought was, bang on. I had put my heart and soul into this. I believed this. How could somebody not agree?
The first of many to come.
Gosh, yes. But anyway, I continued along that line, and that was my way in. These people that I had looked up to and had admired accepted me for that contribution that I could make to that group and that community. But there was still something about the fit. Like, yes, I was part of it, but I just didn't really seem to fit. The square peg in the round hole kind of describes it, but even then, not quite. It wasn't that different, but it wasn't quite comfortable. So finished high school and now was into university. I have an honours degree in synthetic organic chemistry from Melbourne University.
I did not know this. What is that?
Didn't you do your homework in your
research? I did, but I had a beeline as to the information I needed. What is that?
Basically, it means I know how to make drugs and blow things up.
Amazing. Now that sounds useful.
Yeah. Have you seen Breaking Bad?
No, but I know the concept of it.
Yeah, well, Walter, who's the main character, we have the same educational background. So,
right.
So I'm doing my science degree, and I went from a tiny school. There was only 12 people in my year 12 class, and a very small community, church community, friendship group, and things like that. So I went from that to Melbourne University. I was the only one from my class that went to Melbourne Uni because of some of the teaching issues and things like that. There was not a high pass rate.
So upgrade at all.
Yeah. So I went to Melbourne Uni, the only person from my school, and I didn't know anybody else really that was there. So I had to make entire new friendship group. And being a science degree, it's a very practical degree. So you have prac partners and research groups that you have to be part of and all of that sort of thing. And that was great. I really liked university. I liked the learning. I liked that it stretched me and exposed me to new ways of thinking and new people from quite diverse backgrounds. And there was one guy that I met. His name was Finn.
How many Christians in the science degree?
Well, see, I didn't know that because I wasn't a very churchy Christian. That wasn't the card that I went with.
Okay.
I just was interested in meeting the people for who they were, hearing their stories, and it's such a multicultural space. I really enjoyed it. Plus, I was going to the city. Hardly spent any time in the city at all. This was all quite a new environment for me. So yeah, I'm doing my degree, and I did all the the core subjects in the first year of a science degree: chemistry, maths, physics, all that sort of thing. And one of the guys that I met, his name was Finn, and he was from Singapore. And Finn and I, we did a few classes together, but physics was the one that we did together all the time. And for both of us, it was just too hard. Physics was way too hard. Too much maths. And while it was very interesting, trying to learn the language to explain it, it was like, whoa, it was full on. So Finn and I used to sit up the back in the very last row every physics lecture, and we would just talk about whatever, world affairs, current events, things that we'd encountered at uni, all that type of thing.
I was like, light conversation here, world events.
Well, the lectures were 3 hours, so you had to pick something.
Oh my
God. They were long lectures. So anyway, in the conversation with Finn, I don't know, about 2/3 of the way through the year, the topic of homosexuality came up. And while it was never something I really had any firm opinion about, it was something that my opinions had been formed just kind of by osmosis by being in the church. I don't remember anyone ever preaching about it or having any teaching about it in small group or anything like that. It was just kind of had this awareness that, homosexuality was a sin and gay people were always out to seduce you and, try and have sex with you and all the really horrible stereotype things. And so in the conversation with Finn, this is what I regurgitate to him. I just say all the worst of the worst stereotypes you could possibly think of. And then I finished my part of that conversation by saying to him, but I don't know anybody that's gay. And I didn't think I did. And Finn just looked at me like I was the biggest idiot on the face of the planet, because Finn was as gay as they come. And he looked at me with all good grace and this really kind heart. So I get a bit emotional when I tell this story. He looked at me with just love, really, and compassion. And he said to me, Matt, you know lots of people that are gay, just like that. And in that instant, I knew exactly what he was saying to me.
Yeah.
And I just wanted the ground beneath me to open up and swallow me whole, because this was one of my new friends at university. And I've just said these horrible things about him. Finn was a Catholic man and, was there to get an education just like I was, had never asked me out on a date, had never pinched me on the bum or anything like that. I don't know whether I should be offended by that or not. Anyway, it's a whole nother topic. I'll book in for some counselling about that. But then he went on and he said, that girl that's in your biology prac group, that's a lesbian woman. And this person in your chemistry research group, they're transgender. And he just went through, and just about every prac partner I had, and at least one person in every research group that I had, was from the queer community here in Melbourne.
You're a magnet.
I know. And these were my friends. These are my community. And all those stereotypes that I had just regurgitated to Finn, none of them applied to this group of people at all. And so this was what started to shape my view about what the queer community actually was, and really none of them were that different to me. Lots of them, had different personality quirks and things like that. But on the whole, we were at uni for the same reason, to achieve the same sort of goals, to hopefully give ourselves a bit of a launching pad for the rest of life. So continued through uni and started to chase another girl and ended up at another church, but this time it was an eastern suburbs church. It was in the heart of the Bible Belt, and it was in part of the wealthiest parts or suburbs of Melbourne. And I remember the first time that I went to this church, it was still just as boring as the church that I grew up in. That hadn't changed. So in that sense, it felt very comfortable. But in the church that I grew up in, you go to the car park and there were Commodores and Utes and beat up bombs and things like that. But drive into the car park of this church and BMWs and Mercedes, and it's like, what is this place? And on that first time that I was there was supper after the evening service, which is quite normal for churches around the place. And we go to the person's place, and like they had electronic gates that opened when you arrived. And I thought,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. And their driveway was like a drive-around driveway that you see in the movies in those big mansions. And the house was a mansion. It was a 3-story house. I had never, like, you could count on one hand the number of double-story houses I'd been in. I'd never been in a 3-story house before. And it was just stunning. It was this incredible place. And I thought, whoa, this is so different to what I'm used to. And then it started to mess with my head a little bit about how much wealth there was here. What does that mean in terms of, well, that stuff about feeding the poor and the hungry if we're living in a place like this? And also, it's messing with my head about the place of my friends from uni would have in this community, because I knew that people were going to say those same nasty things to them that I had said to Finn.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what it was in a very wealthy eastern suburbs Bible Belt church that made them think that this western suburbs boy that spent a lot of time in nature would be a good choice for their youth pastor.
Oh, yikes. I'm thinking, how on earth did it go from another church, still boring, questioning about the proportions of wealth and the space that the queer community would place in this church and the conversations that would be had, and hey, let's be a minister, let's be a pastor.
Same thing as before. I was chasing a girl.
Right.
Okay. That's what it comes down to. So I got involved in the youth group of this church. I became one of the youth group leaders because the girl I was chasing was one of the youth leaders as well, one of the young adults and part of the worship team. And what happened was, because I'd taken that journey and I had dived so deeply into the Bible and theology and spirituality and things like that, it was like I was bringing a brand new message to this place. You know, they'd not encountered somebody that spoke the way that I spoke. And I'm thinking, what do you mean? It's like normal. So that never quite clicked in my head about why that was the case. But I didn't just find a place there. I found a bit of purpose there. There was actually a role for me. And so I got quite involved in the youth ministry there. And then unfortunately, the youth pastor that was there got involved in some messiness, and the marriage ended and things like that. And so one day I just kind of inherited this youth ministry. I was working in research, so I was, working for a company. I finished uni by this point in time. But now I was doing like 15, 20, 25 hours of youth ministry a week in this church. And I kind of just inherited it all because of, the journey that I'd had up until that point. So I'd established, a youth group and some schools ministries and small groups and things like that, all based around connecting with something bigger than ourselves. And when I had to, I would use the language of God and Christianity, and I'd use the stories from the Bible, but would try and, use other stories as well. We would do a lot of stuff outside because that's what I knew. That's where it had been nurtured for me. So I continued along that path, but also still in the back of my mind was ensuring that, well, if this is what I'm called to do, I'll just use that language for a moment, then I don't really want to be involved in a church, or I don't want to build something that my friends from uni would be excluded from. So I made sure that talking about sex and sexuality was very much normal in my youth ministry. So not just homosexuality, but sexuality across the board. And so that's what we did. And that ministry in that church went relatively well. I was there for 7 years altogether. The last 2.5, I was employed as their full-time youth pastor. So it continued to grow. They asked me if I'd consider it. I was married at this point in time to the girl that I'd been chasing at that church.
Oh, so it finally worked.
It paid off, It's like, oh man, that took a lot of effort. Anyway, I wore her down. And so they asked me, and part of me thought, well, this is kind of what I was built for. It didn't feel like I was taking a risk or anything like that. Didn't have any children. So I walked away from my highly paid corporate research job and became full-time youth pastor. Incorporated the stuff about sexuality into my ministry. And then when it was time to leave that, I left that church and went to a church a bit further out in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. So not still in the Bible Belt, but not in the super wealthy part of the Bible Belt now. It's sort of more middle class. I made a point of making sure that I continued to talk about sexuality and intimacy and all of those things that were part of the journey so far. And I got involved with, so the church was in Whitehorse Council, so I got involved with the Whitehorse Youth Issues Working Party. And it was a group of people that worked with young people in some sort of capacity, social workers, health workers, all that sort of thing. And I went there as one of the youth ministers and would learn lots from these people. They're incredibly gifted people. And I learned so much about working with young people and some of the issues that were in the municipality and things like that, but was also invited to speak into that space in terms of what it means to be a spiritual young person. And so I'd talk about, the challenges the church has around sexuality and some of the damage that it's done, and how it's trying to address that and create safe spaces and things like that. And then one day, this woman that had been part of this Youth Issues Working Party for a long time, she came up to me afterwards and she kind of challenged me. I think what she thought was a little bit, but on reflection, it was actually quite a lot. She said to me, Matt, I hear what you're saying, and it's all really good, but how do the young people in your youth ministry at your church, those that are LGBTI, how do they know that you're a safe person to talk to? I thought, ooh, that's a really good question.
Fair.
Because there was nothing within the church that would suggest that I was safe. In fact, if you were an LGBTI person, this place would be unsafe because there were still those messages being spoken about by the senior pastor.
Yeah.
She knew that I wasn't going to be able to answer that question. She set me up like you would not believe, cow. Anyway, what she did, she knew that I wouldn't be able to answer it. So in the next breath, she said, I've got something for you. And she pulled out of her pocket a packet of rainbow flag stickers, window stickers. And she said, just put one of these on your office window and that will let people know that you're safe to talk to. Okay, that works. Didn't think anything about it. Went back to my office, stuck it on the window, and then went back on with my day. Next day, when I turned up to work, it was gone. Someone ripped it down. I thought, that's really interesting. Fortunately, she gave me a pack of 5, so I still had 4 to go.
Nice.
So I stuck the next one up, and that one lasted about 3 days before someone tore it down. So I put another one up, and now I'm starting to hear rumours about discontent and things like that. It's like, oh, our youth pastor's gay and it's the gay office and it's becoming the gay church and all this sort of stuff starting to happen. And I got furious. I could feel this burning inside me because what they were saying about my friends from uni, and that was not on, you know. Plus, what I had learnt about, I still use the language of God here, about God, about spirit, about that being or that place that made me feel safe and connected. That was for everybody, not just straight people. And what you're saying is excluding people that actually belong here and perhaps belong more in this space. So anyway, it took me a little while, but I realized I could actually stick the rainbow flag sticker on the inside of my office window rather than the outside.
And yet he has a science degree.
That science degree wasn't wasted at all.
Oh, boy.
And I stuck next to it just a little blurb that talked about Jesus making an extra effort with people that were on the margins of society. And I said that in our time, in our culture, considering that this is like 25 years ago, that in our time, in our culture, young LGBTI people, stop it. That is so rude.
I was like 7. I was 7, Matt, 25 years ago.
Yeah, well, you know, I was only 12.
You're the one that mentioned youthful looks earlier,
Yes.
so I thought I just need to clarify.
Yeah, whatever. Thank you. Anyway, what was I saying? You distracted me then. That's your fault.
People on the margins of society.
Oh, yes. So I put the rainbow flag sticker on the inside of my office window with a little blurb that said, Jesus made an extra effort with those that were marginalized and oppressed. And in our time, young LGBTI people fall into that category. So this rainbow flag sends a message that you are most welcome to talk about your sexuality here, but you don't have to. Talk about whatever you like. It's still a safe place for you. And so what happened after that was quite astounding, really. About, I don't know, a month after I managed to stick it up without it getting torn down, a girl came in to speak to me and we got talking. I could tell there was something that she really wanted to talk about. And she struggled to get it out. It took about 2 hours for the story to come out. But basically it was a young person that was quite well known and quite involved in our church community. But on the weekends and after church and after youth group was travelling into another part of Melbourne and engaging in really promiscuous, dangerous sexual activity. And she said to me, look, I'm not a lesbian, but I saw that rainbow flag on there and I thought, well, if it's a safe place for gay people to come and talk to, then maybe it's safe for me to actually talk about this with you. That was the first person that came because of that rainbow flag sticker. Now she did some really good work and got life back on track and is going great guns now. But that was the beginning of what I would describe as a trickle of people coming in and having conversations with me that were prompted by seeing that rainbow flag sticker. And they weren't just young people, they were older people, men, women. Often it was around issues with porn and how that had damaged relationships and things like that. And often the phrase was, and I've never known who to speak to about this before, or I've carried shame about this before. So what became a trickle started to become a bit of a creek, which turned into a bit of a river, which turned into a torrent of people wanting to talk about this stuff. And LGBTI people would come and transgender people would come and all sorts of different people would come. And we would never make sexuality the topic. It was still about spirituality. We were a church. But the message that I was hoping that I could send was very clear that this is not a barrier to you engaging with spirituality, connecting with God, being part of the community that I have been called to. It's a really beautiful story. Had a very tragic start, but a very beautiful ending. There was a music student from Box Hill Institute, which is not far from the church that I was working in, was tragically murdered on the train on his way to uni. And the music cohort is a very close group of students. And so I was called in as the local pastor to go to the house where a bunch of these music students were gathering and just help them with grief and see how they were going. There's about 15 students there. A couple of them joined our young adults group. Some of them kept in touch, but this one person in particular kept in touch, and we caught up a few times, and we had this really lovely email exchange going on. And then one day out of the blue, I got this email from them that said, "Matt, I'm really enjoying being part of your community and connecting with you, but there's part of myself that I keep hidden, and I just think I need to share this with you." And so they go on to tell me the story of their struggles with their gender and identifying as transgender, or identifying as a transgender woman. And then they finish that email with saying, "And if this means that we can no longer be friends and I can no longer be part of your church, I understand." It's like, ugh. You know, how could anybody think that that would be something that meant, at the very least, we couldn't be friends anymore?
Yeah.
So I sat on that email for a night and thought, how am I going to reply to this? And so in the end, I just replied with the most spiritual, theological reply that I could possibly think of. And
Which, knowing you, is none of those things.
That hurts, Sam. So what I said, "Dear," their name, "if you're wanting to get out of my church, you'll need to do better than that." Love that.
Yep, that's what I expected.
And we've been friends for that whole time. We still catch up. Sometimes we spend Christmas together. It's been a really lovely friendship in both directions, as I'll share with you in a moment. So I was at that church for nearly 9 years as the associate pastor for youth and young adults and children. Stepped into the senior pastor role a couple of times when the senior pastor wasn't sick. It was good for my own journey. At this church, I did my own theological training as well. So I went to Whitley College here in Melbourne. I loved Bible college, and I loved going to Whitley. Whitley's approach was not to teach you a particular doctrine or theology or Baptist viewpoint or anything like that. It was to stretch your mind to think beyond what you had experienced so far in your journey. And I loved it because while it was a stretch, also it confirmed a lot of my journey to this point in time, those times as a child by the river and seeing the kangaroos and looking at the water underneath the microscope that I collected and all of that sort of stuff. It just meant, it might not fall into a particular Baptist doctrine, but it's very real, and I've just found it affirming.
If people have not gotten it by now, it is eventually going to land in the space that you are no longer a pastor right now.
Yeah, and have very, very little to do with the church. Yeah. So come to the end of my 8 or 9 years, whatever it was, at that second church. And while my work with the queer community in Melbourne was known, it didn't really cause much of a fuss. And I think that was because I wasn't the senior pastor, that I could be overridden quite easily. My senior pastor, well, at the time, I wouldn't have called him affirming. He was still very supportive, and it was a very pastoral pastor. So he cared for whoever was there. And honestly, I don't really think he cared that much about doctrine and theology. So you just got to toe the line a little bit. So it never was controversial, basically. That's what it came down to.
When did it become controversial?
Don't rush me. I'm getting to that, all right? Jeez.
Well,
you said I had a couple of hours.
No, I did not. I did not say he had a couple of hours. When did it become controversial?
So I left that church to become senior pastor at another church that now was on the outer eastern suburbs of Melbourne. And so we're kind of out of the Bible belt, or at least on the very fringe of it, much lower socioeconomic place. By this point in time, I've volunteered my time as a chaplain with an LGBTI organisation that worked with queer people from the community in Melbourne that had a faith background and had been kicked out of churches or kicked out of families or jobs or whatever. So I'd been part of this group now for, almost a decade. And that meant that wherever I was ministering or working in the church, LGBTI people would come. They'd seek me out to either just talk or have a coffee or to become part of a worshipping community. So when I went to this next church to be the senior pastor, in the interview, I wanted to make sure that at the very least, that these people that were 110% going to follow me to this church would be welcomed. My hope was that they would be affirmed and allowed to do things, but at very least be welcomed. Because of where the church was located, I wouldn't expect it to be a fully affirming community. There's a word that comes to mind to describe the community, but I won't say it out loud just in case anybody's listening from there. Just think of it as a colour, and it's very similar to your hair colour and the part of your body that's below your head. That describes
Oh, right.
it. Oh, yeah.
That took so long for me to get.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, flash it up on the screen or something. So in my interview, I said to them, there are 3 questions that I wanted to ask this church, and depending on the answer, that was going to determine whether I went to this church or not. First question was, if I wanted to run a ministry in the local pub, am I going to be allowed to do that, or are you going to crack it? And they said, no, that's fine. Happy for you to do that. We've actually done some stuff there before. That was fine. Now, I'm married at this point in time with 2 children. So my second question was, if I come to this church, what are your expectations of my wife and family? Because if they said, well, she's going to have to run the children's ministry and the women's ministry and this, that, and the other, wasn't interested. They're employing me, not her.
Yeah.
And so their response to that was, we'd expect her to contribute and participate in things, but not any more than any other spouse of someone that comes to this church. So that was fine. I was happy with that. And then the third question was, if 2 guys turn up on Sunday morning holding hands and sit in the worship service, what sort of welcome are they going to get? And then you could just hear the crickets. It's like, oh, you answer it.
Who's going to answer?
Yeah, I don't want to answer this question. You answer it. You go first. So eventually somebody said, look, we would be uncomfortable about it. No question about that. But we hope that they would be welcomed like anybody else. And then we would have to wrestle with that moving forward. I thought, well, given where this church is located, that's probably the best I could expect. So I decided, yep, I'll sign the paper. They decided that they would call me, and I became the senior pastor there. 6 weeks after I started, 2 guys turned up to the morning service holding hands and sat in the church. And they were welcomed, and it was really lovely to see. And over the next 12 months, lots of LGBTI people started coming to the church. And my pastoral team, so I had 3 other pastors on the team, they were astounded. They said, when we knew that this is what you did, we thought it was going to be a mess, but we were growing this very diverse community and congregation. And after 12 months, it had grown, like not astronomically, but it had grown, and it was much more diverse than it used to be, and we're contributing in places in the community that we'd never done before, and lives were being changed. We changed not changed, but added, contemplative worship and things like that to appeal to other forms of spirituality. And I was really enjoying it. And so by the start of 2011, so that was the end of my first year there, if you'd asked me how long I was going to be a minister, I would have said until I died or retired, whatever came first. Now, what I didn't know was there was an undercurrent of disunity and disappointment and anger about how this church was changing, pretty much from the old guard that had been there, but particularly among the elders of the church. And so in July of 2011, it was when the marriage equality debate was really starting to fire up in Australia. And I was relatively well known in sort of queer Christian circles about being an affirming straight minister. So I was approached by Australian Marriage Equality and asked whether I would give my photo and a quote to their website to support marriage equality, in the hope that it would encourage other people of faith to vote yes in the plebiscite.
If people have not realised, we've hit the controversy.
Yeah. Yeah. Controversial, but not the most formative part of my story.
Yeah.
So, I should have seen this coming, being an ordained Baptist minister by this point in time and so heavily involved in the LGBTI community, surely those things were going to collide at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So July 2011, I'd given my name and quote to Australian Marriage Equality's website. I'd written articles and papers and things like that, imploring us to think differently about the way that we've done theology and inclusion and things like that, begging almost for a pastoral response to this issue in the church rather than having this endless debate back and forth. There's real people that we're talking about, and I could not help but think about the people that I'd studied with and wondering where they are now. And it's like, there's no way they're going to come to a church with all this stuff going on. So the elders meeting in July of 2011, I just went with a normal boring agenda about, which hymn book we're going to use and all that palaver. And that meeting was hijacked straight away by an agenda item that I didn't know was there, that the elders had secretly put together a separate agenda, and the whole agenda was addressing the homosexual issue in our church.
Yikes.
It started to go downhill rapidly from there. So I was asked to present to the combined leadership of the church my theology about sexuality and my understanding and why I was doing what I was doing, which I was more than happy to do. And so for 2 hours, about 3 weeks after that July meeting, I presented to a group of about 25 people, went through it all. About 2 people that were in the room agreed with me 100% and said, it's really good to finally hear this. 2 thought I was the spawn of Satan and wanted my resignation on the spot. And the rest were like, I don't know, it's the first time we've heard this. We can see what Matt's saying, but we know this other stuff. And can you present this to the whole church? And so by this point in time, it's really starting to get nasty. I'm starting to get threatening letters and all sorts of stuff. It's starting to make news around the place. I'm getting reporters calling up and things like that, saying, hey, we heard about this. Is starting, I should have seen it, but what was happening at that point in time was a very big indication of what was coming next.
Yeah.
So in September of that year, I presented pretty much the same thing to the entire church. Now, the church was probably a congregation of about 300 people. On that morning, there was about 500 people there, a whole bunch of people that I had never seen before in my life, but were all apparently heavily connected with the church.
Of course. Not eavesdropping at all.
No. So I did the presentation, and my presentation was entitled A Pastoral Response to Homosexuality in the Church. So it wasn't debating theology. It was how do we best care for LGBTI people in our community? And I said, if the marriage equality vote gets up, we are going to have married same-sex couples come to our church that have children. What are we going to do? Are we going to say you have to split up? Are we going to say that you're a sinner? Are we going to reject them? What are we going to do? I tried to, sound really harsh. And so that was the topic of my conversation, with the viewpoint and the hope that it would cause people to think about, well, how do we welcome him from this space? Also knowing that there were 11 families in that congregation that had LGBTI adult children that were very supportive of their children, but they didn't know. Each of those families didn't know about the other families because they're too scared to talk about it in that congregation. So I thought it was relatively safe to have this conversation. Good one, Glover. So I did my presentation for an hour and a half, and then it was open for questions. And the very first question that came from the floor came from one of the elders. And the question was, when will the diaconate call a special meeting so we can fire you?
When will the what?
The diaconate, the deacons.
Right.
The administrative leadership group of the Baptist Church. So when are the deacons going to call a special meeting so we can fire you? And it just rapidly descended after that. Lots of accusations, lots of heat. My pastoral team escorted me out of the church because they were afraid of my safety. So they took me out a side door and put me in the car and drove away. I was stunned, absolutely stunned about what happened. And I was suspended the next day and never went back to that church. So while I was still their senior pastor and was still doing weddings and funerals and things like that, I was not allowed to go on Sunday. I wasn't allowed to set foot on the property. And a leader from the Baptist Union came every Sunday to facilitate conversations after the worship service. A special meeting was called to fire me, but then they got legal advice that said you can't fire someone because they have a different opinion to you. And so on the morning that the vote was scheduled to happen, there was an announcement in church that said, we've been given advice that means that this vote would be illegal, so we're not going to do the vote. So a whole bunch of people went home afterwards thinking the vote was not going to happen. And most of those people were quite supportive of me. They made an extra effort to turn up to try and make sure that the vote reflected everybody in the congregation. Yeah. And so about 45 minutes after the church service had ended and people had started to go home, the announcement was made that, we actually are going to have a vote. It will not be legally binding, but we just want to gauge what the feeling of is in the congregation. And of course, those that were very negative had all stayed around. I suspect some of them knew that this was going to happen. And so the vote went ahead, and of course it went against me, being their senior pastor. And a couple of the elders then visited me later that day and said, we just want to let you know that we didn't do the vote because it wasn't legal, but then we did do the vote. And the results was this, it was against you. You don't have to quit, but we'll just leave it up to you. It's like, right, I don't have to quit.
Yeah.
So in the end, I resigned and I walked away from that church position. And as it turned out, walked away from church ministry altogether and never went back. And it was one of the most darkest periods of my life. The hate mail just escalated beyond anything I'd ever experienced before. There were death threats. I was still taking some public speaking engagements, generally around spirituality and sexuality. And I was invited to an interfaith gathering in Darebin Council, about 400 people there. And I turned up and I was greeted by 2 uniformed police officers at the door. And they just said, look, we've had some threats, so we just thought we needed to be here to make sure you and the other speakers were safe here. Plus, just so you know, there's 3 plainclothes policemen in the gathering just to make sure. And I'm thinking, how on earth did it get to this? I just thought I'd been talking about how we live the message of Jesus and include those people on the margins. And it's ended up like I need police protection to say that out loud. Yeah. It was nuts. But it was a very dark time for me. Got a PTSD diagnosis at one point. I was too scared to leave the house. One time I did leave the house. I went to the supermarket and encountered someone from my previous church there who just tore shreds off me in the middle of Safeway. And it's like, that's it. I can't leave the house anymore.
Yeah.
But having said that, and this is, part of the story that's perhaps not as well known, was that home life was not good for me. The marriage was very, very difficult. Depending on what definition you use, you could say it was quite abusive, emotionally abusive for my boys and I. And so there was no support for me at home either. So I actually did end up, going and walking the streets of my suburb hour after hour, night after night, because it wasn't safe for me to be home either. And there were quite a few days where I would suck it up and I would go and sit in the food court of our local supermarket or shopping centre, and I'd just sit there all day and I'd just weep or sob or read or draw or do something because I didn't have anywhere else to go and I didn't know who else to talk to. And in that space, the question was, well, where is God in all of this? I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't think I had betrayed anything from what I had learnt and experienced about spirit from those times on my bike by the river, to all of my theology training, to the stuff that I taught through church, to the lives that I'd seen change. I thought I was doing the right thing. How did it end up here? To the point that, I just have to, like where I live, there's another Baptist church just 400 meters away. And so sometimes you can hear the music drift across. And it would just send me in a full-on panic attack, just hearing the music. I'd see my theology books on the shelf or a Bible on the shelf and I couldn't touch it. I couldn't even go near it because, I don't know, I was scared I was going to get zapped or something like that. I ended up selling my entire theological library because I just couldn't bear to have it in the house. And I just didn't know what on earth I was going to do. I still felt that what I was doing was right, that I was on the right path, but how did it get to this? You know?
Yeah.
So I saw a psychologist at that point in time, and, there was all sorts of conversations that we had there. And then one day he said to me, because we were talking about, well, what on earth am I going to do next? I can't go back to the church. I don't really want to go back to chemistry unless I'm making drugs and blowing things up.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, well, why don't you do what I do?
Mm.
What do you mean? Why don't you become a psychologist? You've got the people skills, you tell good stories. I can see that you've got a compassionate heart. Why don't you just do this? Never even crossed my mind that that was a possibility. So I looked into it, and psychology was another 7 years of study. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't do that. By this point in time, I already have 3 degrees. Like, what? But I did realize that I could become a counsellor. I could do my master's in counselling and could finish that because of all my recognition of prior learning. I could finish that within 12 months and start my counselling practice. So that's what I did. But one of the really beautiful stories that it gave me hope that I was on the right track and reassured me that now I'm going to use the language of spirit rather than the language of God. That spirit was big enough that it would never be contained by the church, that it would never be contained by a certain doctrine or theology. It had to be experienced and connected to that way. So I was speaking at another event. It was back with this organisation that I'd been volunteering with. By this point in time, it was about 3 or 4 months after I had finished up in the church. Big media circus. I'd been the subject of talkback radio. 7:30 report came around to my house to do a story. Front page of the Age newspaper. It was just nuts because the marriage equality thing was becoming big news, and there was lots of fighting. Yeah. And so the idea that there was a straight, married, ordained minister that would sacrifice everything for this, that was interesting news, So anyway, I get invited to speak at this group, and I tell the story about what had happened. And there are lots and lots of people there, much more than normal. And that was really beautiful because basically what it was the queer community coming out to support me because I'd stood up for them. And it was really, really lovely. And I got to the end of my talk just telling my story and opened it up for questions. Oh, man, the emotion gets me at this too. A hand goes up at the back of the room asking a question. And so I just point to the person, and he didn't ask a question at all. He just stood up.
Yeah.
It was Finn from uni. Hadn't seen him for 30 years or something like that. And he walked out and he just threw his arms around me and gave me the biggest hug. It was beautiful. And in that moment, it's like, this is the right path for me. Finn was now a science teacher. He'd listened in physics, dog. He was still with his same boyfriend from uni. He still had his Catholic faith, all that sort of stuff. And just that hug was all embracing, and it just filled my tank. So, okay, my calling has stayed the same, but my job needs to change. So went and retrained as a counsellor and started my work. As a counsellor, opened MGA Counselling Services. The rainbow colours are part of my logo. And of course, over time, incorporated the nature-based stuff into what I do, helping people connect with nature for their own mental health. But what I found was that my story wasn't unique. There were people leaving the church left, right, and centre for similar reasons of hurt and pain, disillusionment, and things like that. And it was out under the trees, connecting with nature, where healing happened. Richard Rohr says that nature is God's first Bible. There's something about encountering spirit there where there is no doctrine or curtain of theology or walls of the church that gets in the way. It's just pure. And when I thought about it, it's like, well, when everything was perfect in the original stories in scripture, God and people existed together in the garden. It was outside. In the New Testament, Jesus' first resurrection appearance, he's mistaken for the gardener. It happened outside. There's something about encountering spirit in its purest form that happens in nature. And so that's where lots of my healing happened in that journey, and for my boys as well. The story that doesn't really get told that much during that time was that things in my marriage were really tough. There were nights that I was sleeping in the car by the river and things like that, that it just wasn't safe for me to be home. And eventually it got to the point where my wife called it off. She said that she was done. And part of the reasoning for that was God was used as a justification for that. I've prayed about it. It's the right thing for me to do. So I'm ending the marriage. Doesn't matter what you think. So no really wanting to work on it or anything like that. We had some counselling, but there was 5 different counsellors, and every time there was a challenge, no, not going back to see that one. So it was done. And so I kind of found myself, as by this point in time, I was late 40s, now a single parent raising 2 teenage boys, trying to establish a new career and new friendship groups and communities and all that sort of stuff, and thinking, where on earth is God in all of this? I had been loosely connected with the church after I finished ministry. I couldn't go every Sunday. There was panic attacks that would happen, but then I would come home and just yelled at. I said, "You're just making church miserable for us. Why do you keep coming?" No sense of, hey, I'm really hurting here and I just need someone to give me a hug.
Yeah.
So I couldn't really go back to that church for any support at that time. I did meet with the senior pastor and told him what was going on. And the next thing I know, my now ex-wife had been invited to the single parents group for support. And I was just discarded from all of that. She met and married another guy very quickly, and so they became part of the church and welcomed into the community and all of that sort of thing. And while the people and leadership of that church didn't do anything wrong, not at all, there was a sense of betrayal there that I've not heard a single thing from anybody in terms of my support. I know I haven't been there every Sunday, but I couldn't, a few people said, well, why didn't you just reach out? And when it comes to trauma, I hear this all the time. You may do with your trauma clients as well, that people say, oh, if you just want to catch up, give us a call and we'll go out for a coffee or something like that. But saying that to someone who's traumatized is like expecting someone who's drowning to throw you the rope. Just can't do it. You're getting washed away. Somebody needs to throw the rope to you. Nobody did that. I don't know what they thought of this guy who, used to be a minister and, betrayed the Baptist faith or whatever. Who knows? All sorts of things went through my mind. All I do know is that I found myself very alone, very cut off from what I thought was my supports, what I thought was my community and my job and my calling, and kind of having to redefine whatever the path was going to be forward at the same time as raising my 2 sons.
What does your sense of spirituality look like now?
Well,
other than lots of trees.
Oh, that's it. I have nothing else to say. No, look, it really came full circle. So as my boys and I worked out, well, how do we do life now? There's going to be lots of restrictions. Financially, it's going to be really difficult, all of those sorts of things. We would walk in our local area, which is quite bushy, and we would go to the valley just near where we live, and we would lie on our backs at nighttime and look at the stars. And sometimes we would laugh, sometimes we would cry, sometimes we'd make plans, sometimes we'd just lie there silently. But all the time being held by the trees, being held by spirit. And even now, all of these years later, when my oldest son walks down that way, he says that it feels like these trees are my companions. They've heard our story, they've held us safe, and they welcome us still, which is really beautiful in a sense. In forest therapy and forest therapy training, we talk about the more than human community. So we don't place humanity at the top of the food chain or anything like that. It's very much part of it, with the trees and the birds and the kangaroos and the grass and all that sort of thing, being held at the same time as holding. And so in that space, that's where I was able to perhaps discover a new sense of spirituality, perhaps a deeper sense of spirituality, but also reconnecting with that original spirituality that I discovered when I was a little boy, riding around on my bike through nature in the mountains and by the river for hours and hours and hours without knowing anything about Christian theology or church life or anything like that. So that's the space that it's been rediscovered or reconnected to. It's still very much part of my everyday. And in the work that I do, it's probably no surprise that a big chunk of the people that I work with are people with spiritual and religious trauma, because they've done their research, they've done their Google searching, and up comes that story of that Pastor Matt Glover. Yeah, that's a story.
Who looks exactly like a pastor.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so full circle. Last question. What are you saying to somebody who is in the thick of it? They've just come out, they've just left their faith community, whether by choice or not by choice. They're wrestling with their concept of who God is, all of that. What would you say to them?
There's two things. There's one thing that I have said to a number of people on this journey that I wouldn't say that everybody should say or even needs to say, but in my position as a minister, as a privileged middle-aged white guy, I think it's actually quite important to say, because often, particularly with queer people that come to counselling, nobody has ever said it to them before. And what I do is I apologise to them for the treatment that they have received, for the things that have been said to them that are simply not true, for the lies that have been said about them over the years. Now, I've apologised to perhaps hundreds of people, and every single time the response is exactly the same: tears. And you're the first person that's apologised to me. I think that's really, really important as an acknowledgement that the journey that they've taken, they have been wronged deeply in that space. And while the people that have done those things will probably never take ownership for it, at least I can be a symbol that can apologise there and hopefully bring a little bit of healing or at least some release from that space. If it's a person of faith, I will add to that, I'll apologise to them and I'll say, and God loves you for who you are. Sometimes I'm the first person that's ever said that to them as well. For some people, that's not appropriate, or sexuality is just not an issue at all. And so then we talk about grief, of course, because it feels like there's a huge loss. We're leaving something behind. But then we'll talk about, well, perhaps it's not a leaving behind. Perhaps it's simply part of our journey into something deeper. And so we explore what that possibly could be. And we talk about the stages of faith and all of those sorts of things that suggest that there's actually still more things to discover ahead. And perhaps your experience in church is just part of the journey to get to that place. So we can celebrate the good from the church. We can be angry about the bad, but let's not stop any of that from discovering the good, perhaps the awesome that is ahead.
I love that. Holding all of it and not necessarily even putting a moral value or a moral spin on it. Just, it is what it is.
I get asked that sometimes. Do you regret doing your theological degree and the formation program and becoming an ordained minister in the Baptist Church? Not at all. Not at all. Really important part of my journey. And a lot of the things that I experienced there has meant that I can speak into this space of spiritual and religious trauma.
Yeah.
Because you know it. You know the language, you know the hurt that it causes. I've experienced it myself. But also there was a lot of good stuff there too. Some things that, really opened my eyes to possibilities, promoted in me a curiosity that meant I've asked questions in places that I didn't even know there were questions to ask. So I don't regret it, but I don't want to go back there either. It's like not wanting to go back to prep or grade 1 or year 7 or anything like that. That has played its part in my journey. It's time to move to the next thing.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me.
That's all right. Pleasure as always. Thank you for being relatively nice to me today.
Always nice to you.
I'm going to quote you on that.
Please don't. Thanks, Matt.
All right, Sam, thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are on your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.